Hello, I'm Mike Ryan. I'm the Chief Networking Officer at PIMS, and welcome to our second season of Minutes with Mike. Now in my 33rd year at PIMS, I've had the privilege of partnering with companies both large and small, supporting their PR and marketing through customized fulfillment and distribution that delivers measurable impact on their brand perception, boosts positive affinity, and fuels their overall brand performance. And throughout my career, I've had the chance to work alongside many talented folks. This is their story. On this show, we'll sit down with some of the world's top marketing and business thought leaders to learn more about their success, how they got there, how marketing helped them achieve their goals, what strategies they used, and what inspires them. Please join me on this journey as we learn from those who are changing the way we think about business. So sit back, enjoy. You're listening to Minutes with Mike. Welcome, everybody, to the latest episode of Minutes with Mike. I'm Mike Ryan, and I have the pleasure of being joined today by Mr. Ken Kerrigan. Welcome, Ken.
Yeah, thanks, Mike. It's great to be here.
Ken is the 2025 elect, if I'm right, 2025 elect president of the New York chapter of the PRSA.
Yeah, actually president. So I was president-elect last year, and I'm the formal president this year.
There you go. Excellent.
And next year I get to be past president. So it's like past, present, and future.
We're happy to have you. Absolutely. I've been working with the PRSA now probably for 35 years, right? And when I was in college, I was a member of the PRSA, right? And for those who don't know, PRSA is the Public Relations Society of America, and the PRSA is the student version of that. And it was everybody in my class, everybody in my school, everybody at that time, this is back in the late 80s, was so invested in trying to get an opportunity to be a member of the PRSA. We were all majoring in public relations, although at that time, nobody knew what that even meant. We thought it was a form of advertising, right? We thought it was a way to be able to drink cocktails with a nice gray, like Darren from Bewitched, a nice gray suit with a thin tie. That was the dream. So, I didn't quite land in public relations, but we do certainly work with all the agencies, not only here in the U.S., but abroad. So I wanted to find out how you got to where you are. Tell us a little bit about Ken Kerrigan, how it started and what brought you to where you are.
Yeah, so that's an interesting question. And in my book that I wrote during COVID, that was the first question that I wanted in chapter 1 was, how did I get here? And the first sentence in my book, I think it's the first sentence, maybe it's the second sentence, but I wrote, I'm an accidental PR man. And the reason for that is I had no intention of going into this business. I didn't know what it was at all. And my intent when I was an undergrad at NYU was I was going to law school, and I was a pre-law student, and I was paying my way for what I wasn't getting in scholarships and federal grants. I worked every day from 4 to 11 as a municipal bond clerk at what was then called the Depository Trust Company, and did my schoolwork when I wasn't counting bonds at night. And eventually I met with the advisor for the law school to talk about the process of taking the test and filling out my application. And I'm sitting in his office and he looking at a bunch of paper, and he looks up at me and he just starts laughing. And I'm like, what's so funny? And he said, this is a joke, right? And I said, I don't know what you're talking about. And he said, well, you're never going to get admitted to NYU Law. And I said, why not? And he said, because it's a good school. And have you looked at your GPA? And I'm like, no, I haven't. And this is, I'm serious. This is a real conversation. I said, no, I haven't. And he said, you should. And now, this is a while ago. So it wasn't like you could just log on to the NYU website and look at your GPA. You actually had to go to the bursar's office and have an index card pulled and looked at it. So I never did. And I said, well, yeah, but there's a reason for that. I work every night. I'm paying my way through school, and maybe I don't have time to actually do all the reading, but I'm in class every day and I'm working really hard. And he said, yeah, we don't care. And I'm like, that doesn't count for anything? And he said, no, maybe if you come back when you're 40, we might care, but right now we don't care. And I said, all right, so should I set my sights on St. John's instead? And he laughed again and said, that's also a very good law school. What are you not understanding? And I'm like, so you're saying I'm not going to law school? And I said, no, you're not. And I left and I'm like, okay, well, I can't afford to start over and take like a whole new set of credits because I took all these classes that were in the pre-law category. And if I'm not going to law school, what the hell am I going to do with those? So then it hit me, all right, maybe I'll become a reporter, major in political science, and go to the journalism school. So I did that, and I was really liking that. And then it came time to sign up for what was like reporting 2. It's the next mandatory class in the process. And that class directly interfered with my work schedule. So I met with one of the professors and I said, hey, here's the deal. I work from 4 to 11, Monday through Friday. I'm a municipal bond clerk. I pay my way through school. And I see that this class doesn't end till 5, but is there a way to work around that? Can I turn in my content before then? And so I can still go to work. And I said, oh no, you have to be in the room and turning in your written assignment to the professor. And then we're going to talk about it until 5. I'm like, well, I can't be an hour late to work twice a week. It doesn't work for me. And they said, well, you have no other option. You have to take this class. So I don't know what to tell you. Like, I can't be a journalist then. I'm not going to get this degree. And what do I do? It's I can't keep starting over. And I don't remember the professor's name, but she said, well, have you ever thought about public relations? And I said, no. What's that? And she said, remember that's that thing we talked about in like week 6 or 7 about the people that journalists don't really like, but they give us stories sometimes? I'm like, yeah, vaguely. She said, well, why don't you enroll in that class? That would be more flexible. And I did. And I should have pulled it out as a prop, but somewhere in my office, I actually have my first notebook from that class. And it was Introduction to Public Relations.
It's definitely a different world nowadays because obviously, the way that schools handle students are different. The way that schools schedule classes are different. And it just, it brings back such great memories from what you're saying of like being in school, like trying to figure out which is the next path you're going on. So go ahead. I cut you off.
But hard when that path keeps changing, almost like a ride in an old amusement park from the 80s. But in that notebook on that first page, I actually wrote in the margin, this is for me. And I realized that it's the writing that I would have done as a journalist, but it's also the advocacy that I would have been doing for clients as an attorney in a profession that sounded interesting and fun. And the class schedule worked out so that I could still graduate on time without having to take additional credits. And then I joined, like you, I joined the PRSA, and there was an opportunity to be president. I'm like, nobody wants that? I'll do it. And then I ended up meeting a bunch of people and the career started. And that's many years ago, but I never looked back.
And I'm sure, it's changed too a bit now in these days, right? On how people sort of get that jump start. But I think what attracted me at first was I was always a little bit on the other side of the curve, but I was always had the gift of gab. I was always comfortable being in front of people, in front of the room, speaking and talking. So somewhere along the way, some counselor, either in high school or first year of college, told me, certainly wasn't an option of law school or not, but they were like, did you ever think about doing public relations? And again, not knowing what that was, I had the luck of that my father was an accountant with what used to be Ciba Geigy and now is owned by Novartis, right? And he's like, I can get you an internship in the communications department at Ciba Geigy. And that's how I kind of kicked into it. And as luck would have it, sort of found my path from there. Did you start with internships yourself, or how did you?
I did. So my paying job was, as I said, as a municipal bond clerk. But once I discovered public relations, there was this wonderful adjunct professor, who's still out there. He's not practicing PR anymore. I think he became a playwright, but his name was Angelo Parra. And he was very involved in PRSA-NY. I think he was on the board for the New York chapter. And he came into class one day and he said, hey, there's some internships that I could put you guys forward for if you're interested. And I immediately looked up and said, hey, like as I'm getting towards the end of my journey at NYU, maybe I should start doing things that are connected to what I want to do when I get out of here, because I don't want to be a municipal bond clerk.
Right.
One of them was at what was then called New York Telephone, which some people say, what's New York Telephone? But now it's Verizon. And it was in their media department. And he said, it's this guy, Steve Marcus, who was one of the great people I've ever worked for. And he said, go meet with him and see if you're interested. And the job was crazy in that it started at 6 a.m. each day. And you would work there from 6 to 10 and then go to class. But it paid $10 an hour, 6 to 10.
They have big
Back
money.
then, that was some boku bucks. And the job was really fascinating. And again, this is pre-internet, pre-Google search engines and AI. But the job was to read. So there were two of us as interns in this windowless room with a supervisor whose name was James Bond. It's something you don't forget. And he was also a really cool guy. And we would get a list of topics that were important to the management of New York Telephone. And we'd get a stack of magazines and newspapers and a box cutter and a bottle of glue. And we would have to find articles that had references the management of New York Tel cared about and actually slice it out. Cut and paste is the word that you think only exists as a tool on Microsoft, but we were literally cutting and pasting. And we'd put it together, and then Mr. Bond would review it for editorial quality, make sure we hadn't missed anything, and then put it in order that was important to the client. And we also had an AP and UPI ticker in the room. So we'd also have to get up every once in a while and just grab the ticker and read to say, did anything just cross the AP that's of interest? And then his name was Danny, I haven't seen him in years. We would then take this pasted up document and run down to the basement of the building where the copy room was. And we would make several hundred copies of this clip report. And then we would divide it up and we would go to the executive floor. And by 9 a.m., every member of the executive team of New York Telephone needed to have that document on their chair or we were in trouble. The good news is that after that, for a weekly magazine, if I want to read that at lunch or after school, I just had to track my time. So on Sundays, I could sit and have a cup of coffee and read the entire Sunday Times cover to cover and get paid. So I would make $30 every Sunday morning just reading the paper. So that was my intro to PR, but I think it was the great stepping stone because I had to read about almost everything. And you say, oh, you're only reading about topics that matter to a phone company, but they cared about everything from the beginning of the privacy conversation to then phone sex was actually the big political issue on the table, M&A, consolidation of the industry. So I was reading about everything and understanding who was writing what and why. And that was the first step.
We should call this the throwback episode of Minutes with Mike because many connections that I'm doing just from hearing you tell these stories. So, before the days, and people watching this probably won't even know what I'm talking about, but before the days of Burrells and Luce, we used to do those clips. We did the same thing. And in fact, here at PIMS, there was a service we provided, right? The agencies would send in these giant, remember they would do them in those big black with the giant zipper going across like the ad books. Those clips. And we, just like you had to run down and make those copies, we would make those and send them over like on a weekly basis to prove these clip reports. The days of cut and paste weren't invented yet. We had to literally peel the plastic off, take it off the glue and put it down to yourself.
Exactly right.
It feels like it's yesterday, but nowadays with AI and everything else you can do, like this is archaic, brother.
Exactly. Yeah.
The other thing I wanted to ask you about, so at 89, when I started at PIMS, when I was shopping around different agencies to try to beg them to hire me, you had to take a typing test. And I remember in high school, you have the choice between shop class and typing. And all the guys went to shop and all the gals went to typing because they were in the typing world, or supposedly they were going to be secretaries of some form, and the guys were going to build stuff. So as soon as I landed on my feet, the first thing somebody said was, can you type? And to this day, I'm still a finger. Little did I know. And I remember my parents saying, do you ever consider like just taking typing lessons? I'm like, what are we going to need that for? I was curious on your end, like what other functionalities do you see that sort of evolved in the whole era that you've been in? Like what started out very archaic and old school that has now grown?
Well, it's almost fascinating to me. It's like you were listening in on a conversation in my living room just last night because my daughter, who's now working at PR, we were talking about where my career started and, how did I get to do the work I'm doing now? And did I always want to do that? And the answer was no. I want to do entertainment PR. And she said, then why didn't you? Why didn't you chase that dream? And I'm like, because I couldn't type. So this is a true story. It's very much what you're talking about. I was interviewing, and I remember like it was yesterday, at the agency Rogers & Cowan, which I now think is part of IPG.
Yeah.
But they had everybody at the time. There was like Creative Artists Associates and Rogers & Cowan and PMK that were the forces in entertainment PR. And they wanted to send me off into this windowless room and give me copy that somebody else had written and have me type it up. And they were counting my words by the minute. And I said, no. And they said, what do you mean? And I said, I'm not going to type somebody else's thoughts.
Like it's you. Very smooth, yeah.
I'm a great writer, and I'm going to write my own stuff. And like you, people said you write like an Irish cop, but I kind of do that hunt and peck. And now I realize like I can type so fast with 2 fingers that if I used all 10,
Can you imagine?
Easy. But they said, well, okay. And they never called me back. And then I made the same mistake at a much larger agency that's gone now. I don't know if they were acquired by somebody, but it was called Kramer Dixon Basford.
Oh, yeah.
And the CEO of Kramer, wonderful woman, Jean Farinelli, took me to breakfast. And I kind of a egotistical jerk coming out of school for, if I met myself today and said, dude, take it down a couple of notches. It's okay if you don't want to type somebody else's copy, but take it down. But I remember having breakfast with Jean at a restaurant that's not there anymore. It was the Brasserie that used to be around the corner from the Four Seasons in Midtown. And we're having like the power breakfast. I'm having my eggs Benedict. And she said, so tell me, what kind of client do you want to represent? And I said, I want to work for Frank Sinatra. And she said, okay, that's weird. I wouldn't expect a college student to say they want to work for Sinatra, but he's not a client. But what else do you want to do? I said, no, that's what I want to do. I want to like be doing entertainment PR and movies. And she said, oh, well, that's not what we do, but it was nice meeting you. We had a lovely breakfast. And I went for a walk. I wasn't like that eager or concerned about getting a job. And I go home and there's a message on my answer machine and it's from her office saying, Jean really enjoyed meeting you this morning and she wants to have you meet a bunch of people this afternoon. We're going to send a car to come get you. And like, I'm this 21-year-old kid. And I'm like, you're sending a car to pick me up and take me to the city? Cool.
You're king of the world.
I did that. And again, I'm meeting with somebody and I think the job was like mine for the taking. And I said, well, let's be clear. Like, I'm not coming in as an assistant account executive because I'm not going to file for somebody else's stuff. I'm going to do the work right away. And so I'm going to skip a level. And like, well, we don't do that. I'm like, well, I do. And I didn't get that job either. And suddenly my aspirations changed, probably for the better as I look at it. But it all came down to you were being, to your question, I was being judged by not the deepness of my intellectual curiosity. I was being judged by how fast I could type. And I think we've come full circle now where that I couldn't imagine anybody under the age of 30 who's listening to this, or maybe even under the age of 40, are saying, you can't be serious. And like, I think now the writing test is solely in agencies, especially about how you think and what your strategy would be and not how many words you type in a minute. So I think we've happily moved on from there, but that did change my career path substantially. I would have been working for Russia's Gillen if I could type.
I wanted to ask you too, before we get into the PRSA part of it, I wanted to ask you about trends and influencer marketing. So at PIMS, our bread and butter is we do customized influencer marketing, which is everything from retail sendouts to influencer creator sendouts, direct warehousing, fulfillment, distribution. The world in that end, believe it or not, has changed dramatically in 30 years, right? Like the way that when we first started sending stuff out to folks, it was all press release driven out to the media, right? It was magazines and TV, radio, wire services, that sort of stuff. They got these 2 or 3 page press releases. We would send them out by the thousands. And we were like, life is good. One day somebody asked us, can you send a product? We're representing Wrigley's gum. Do you think we could put a gum? And then we were introduced to the world of product fulfillment, which changed the way we do our business. So I'm curious on your end, what are some trends over the time that you think really shaped PR and maybe who you are and what you've done? And what do you think of the latest trends that are happening right now?
Well, Mike, I think it's a great question. And another line that's in my book, not that I'm here to plug a book that came out 2 years ago, but it is called Our Future in Public Relations, available on Amazon.com and everywhere fine books are sold.
Love it.
But one of the lines I have is a quote from the song Everything Old is New Again by Peter Allen, Carol Bayer Sager. And I think everybody likes to think that the modern day public relations is all that different than the way it was practiced 100 years ago, literally. And the example I use is we talk about the rise of the influencer. And I talk about the great campaign by Ed Bernays for Lucky Strike, which, those who want to go on YouTube and Google that, it's called The Torches of Freedom. But they had come to Bernays, and this is decades before there was any conversation about cigarettes being bad for you. And a lot of people like to taint Bernays as the person who got women to smoke. But nobody knew at the time. But the assignment was, there's this social stigma that women aren't allowed to smoke in public. And if we could break that, we could double our market share overnight, because suddenly women would be buying more cigarettes. Can you help us do that? And he went back and did some research and realized that women were seeing this as a social stigma. And that was right when the suffragette movement was developing, and made the connection of, could a cigarette be sort of a visual symbol, just like Lady Liberty, and be the torch of freedom? And could he make that a thing? But the only way he was going to do that was not through a press release saying Lucky Strikes says that the cigarette's a torch of freedom. People laughed out of the room. So he used social influencers, and he got debutantes and suffragettes of the day and created a social event, which was the Easter parade, and said, with the 5 of you, march in the Easter parade. And on this particular corner on Fifth Avenue, would you all stop? And I'll have the photo desk of every newspaper in New York. So that's the modern day equivalent of that would be Instagram and TikTok. And will you all light up a cigarette simultaneously so that we can all get a photo of that image? And not only did they do that, but others got on board and said, oh, well, I'm a fashion designer. Let me do a custom cigarette holder that makes it look fancy. And it's a very famous photo. When I talk about that, I'm like, how is that different than today's integrated communications program, where you went out and you hired 5 social influencers and connected it to some big creative idea of the torch of freedom hashtag? It's not. It's the exact same thinking, but it was 100 years ago. And we often forget about the history. Now, what's changed there is, I think, the rise of the social influencer. Everyone thought, well, that means I have to hire a Kardashian. And I think that's changed a lot. And now we're in the era, it's not necessarily a good thing, but we're in the era of the micro influencer that is directly relevant to your stakeholder audience. And they don't have to be famous. They just have to be somebody that feels just like me. And because I think they come out of my world. And they're also can be a lot cheaper to engage and more effective. And the reason why that's important, and this is what I think is concerning, is that the Pew Research Center did a study, came out a couple months ago, of the next generation, where they get their news. And no surprise, the vast majority are getting it from social platforms, and particularly Instagram and TikTok. And then when they peel back the onion another layer, they said, who are you following? And the good news is that they're following a couple of traditional media sites, because everybody's on TikTok, everybody's on Instagram, everybody's still on X, everybody's on Blue Sky. They're just not really saying anything. But it's a tiny percentage of who their followers are. So people are still getting their news from these third-party influencers who should not be confused with Edward R. Murrow, even if they look like George Clooney. But that raises the stakes for us as communicators. That means we can't ignore that anymore. That is the new reality. So how do we engage with the right influencers that make sense for the budget? But how do we find that influencer that connects back to tell the story for the client? Just like Bernays used the suffragettes on Fifth Avenue a century ago. And I think that's the new dynamic, but we have to learn from the past to be ready for where the future is going, or we're just going to turn into advertising people.
Yeah. Ken, how do you, when the subject's broached about creative storytelling versus sort of data-driven entertainment, right? Like, so there are all sorts of bells and whistles you can subscribe to now, PR, that give data and analytics to the very second of doing stories, and how the news travels now. In 5 seconds, you can find out, what it used to take weeks to find out, right? So people base their next move a lot on that specific data and analytics tied to that. But there's a lot of people that are still like the more wholesome, down-to-earth, creative storytelling you can do that hits the individuals themselves. these creators create stories on a micro level, as you were just saying, that enhances the product maybe more than these much larger influencers. How do you kind of juggle that creative process when you're walking folks or clients through it? Like, here's why we're going to go for the smaller creators, and here's where we're going to go for the larger ones, or how's best to manage that?
I think it's all ingredients of the strategy. So what channel are you going to use? What influencer you're going to use are part of it, but they're not replacements for the story. And Chris Anderson, who runs TED Talks now, back when I think he said this when he was the editor of Wired, and I'm going to paraphrase it, but the quote was basically, human beings are hardwired to learn through the power of story. And we always have been since the beginning of time. We've learned everything by stories that our parents told us or stories that we heard about what happened to somebody. Like, oh, if Mel Brooks were doing the 2,000-year-old man, he would say, oh, when Saul burned his hand on fire, it really hurt. So we don't put our hand in fire. And so story is still key to everything, but how you frame the story for the client, I think, is where the art of what we do meets the science. So AI and data is the science part that can give us faster insights and facts and figures. But I often say to clients, when was the last time you left a conference and said, wow, that speaker shared so many facts and figures? Like, I was enthralled. You may say that, but you probably don't remember them. You're going to say, I hope I get a copy. When you leave a conference and say, that speaker this morning, that story they told about what's going on in the industry just really hit a chord with me. Oh, and yeah, they shared a bunch of facts and figures too. So story is everything. So in my evening job, when I'm on faculty at NYU, and when I open up each semester at my class, I teach a class in rhetoric and persuasion, and I introduce them to Aristotle. And Aristotle is one of the many things he's known for is the creation of the rhetorical triangle. And the three pieces of that are, in Greek, are ethos, logos, and pathos. And that is, if you want to persuade people through telling them a story in the town square or on your website or on Substack or wherever you want to be, you need the three to be persuasive and to tell an impactful story. And for those who don't speak Greek, ethos is the credibility of the speaker. So who is going to tell the story for your organization? Is that a micro-influencer or is that your CEO? Who's the right storyteller? The logos are the facts and figures to show that this isn't just their opinion. This is substantiated data that matters to the audience. And that can be data-driven, and AI and all these other platforms can help you get there. And then the last part is the pathos or pathos, the emotional quotient, to truly understand your audience and what's keeping them up at night. And why would they, and they're all interconnected. So why do they care about the ethos of the speaker? And do they relate to that person? Do these facts and figures connect with them and all those things that are making them lose sleep? And are you demonstrating that you really understand the market and that you have a solution to help them have better lives, whether that's professionally or personally? And when you do all three, well, that's done through storytelling. And the most effective ethos is the person who can tell a story about their career. Or I often say when I was in Ernst & Young, our chairman would often say, I've probably been in more boardrooms than anybody else in America. And what I can tell you is the things that the Fortune 500 are really focused on is this. And suddenly he established his credibility, and he's telling a story about conversations that he's overhearing in boardrooms. And now I'm listening closely. And when he first did it, I said, that was really cool. And then he did it again in another interview. And afterwards I took him aside. I said, hey, Jim, you're in New York a lot. How many board meetings have you been to this year? And he said, I don't know. I'm like, more than anybody else in America? And he said, well, I don't know that, but it's a great story, right? And then he gave me a Snapple and a slice of pizza. And I'm like,
That's
I'm never
awesome.
going to forget that.
That's great.
But the arc of the story is everything. But you have to figure out, is it a story that's going to resonate with your audience? Am I the right storyteller? And if I'm not, who is? And then do I have the right facts and figures to make this not misinformation, but tangible storytelling? And you do all three, and that's really impactful. I think that is the future of communications, but a lot of it's the way we used to do things, and we just have new tools.
Great. I was just popped into my head. Something you said made me think of this, but and this is a question. I have no idea what the answer is going to be. do we still use that 8P style guide? Is that still like the big thing? You remember that? Is that still a thing?
It is a thing, and I'm looking on my shelf. Of course, like most props, I'm not going to see it in front of me. I just did my syllabus, and I'm sorry for walking away from the microphone there. I just did my syllabus AP style guide for the graduate program in communication management at NYU. AP style guide is a non-negotiable must-have, because for journalistic style writing, it is the standard of how content's done. But it's also, there's so much more in the style guide to explain how things are phrased and why, and help you even understand the language of business. It's become more than just, here's how you do a dateline.
It's so funny because 1987, Brockport State University, upstate New York, my professor, God rest his soul, Chad Skaggs, used to have this, made you buy it. And then it was like $15. It was like all the money I could muster.
It ain't 15 anymore.
Yeah, I know. And they used to have these tab sections on it, and he would have us writing stuff, and then everybody would not be able to follow that thing because it was like kind of reading Greek a little bit. And then he would take your book, flip through it, drop it back, try again. Like you said, it kind of taught us that if you're going to be in this world, this is your window. This is your door to enter. You can't just come in there and fly and just say whatever you want. Like nowadays, you go on these different TikToks and Instagrams and all this stuff. You can say whatever you want. So half the stuff I'm reading, I can't even understand. But that was, this is how it's going to be. And everybody followed it. And I was, as we were talking, I was like, it just popped in my head. I'm like, I wonder if they still teach that, still use that.
We do. And I argue for persuasive writing, to write content like a journalist would is what separates us from PR and marketing.
Yeah.
And that it can't seem like a sales message. It has to seem like it's a story based in truth. And that's the journalistic ethos. And you learn that from the AP style guide.
Let's talk about the PRSA. So how did you get started there, and your current role as president? Tell me all about the PRSA.
Yeah. So it started back in that class with Angelo Parra. I won't say how many years ago, but it was around the time that the Mets won the World Series last. So recent. And Angelo introduced me to PRSA, and then I was fortunate enough that being in New York was helpful, that the board for the New York chapter would invite us as students to come to lunch with them and talk about what we were doing on campus. And they actually encouraged us to start our own agency at NYU, which we did. And we were able to make a deal with Hill and Knowlton, where we said, do you get a lot of pro bono requests? And they said, yes. And we said, do you have a lot of time to do that? I said, no, we want to do more, but we don't have the time. I said, how about I give you an army of 10 PR students and you let us use your fax machines and photocopiers and we'll do the work. And they said, yes. And the first client we got was St. Bartholomew's Church on Park Avenue. And they were in a fight over air rights. Somebody wanted to build an office tower on top of the church, and they were fighting against that. And that was a Hill and Knowlton pro bono client. And I remember doing like the early work for that. And every time I pass it, I'm really happy that there's nothing on top of that church on Park Avenue. And that started everything. So I then graduated and joined PRSA officially and was active in it for at least the first 10 years of my career. And then honestly kind of fell away. And I think that's one of the challenges in the business is that there are other associations for people to engage with as you become more experienced. And that's things like the Page Society, the Institute for Public Relations. For me, I also went to grad school in the middle of that. And then about 5 years ago, I was asked to come back and play a leadership role. And I was at a point where I remembered people who took an interest in me as a student and said, sure, I'll do that. And this is an extension of what I'm already doing in the classroom, and got re-involved thinking I would like volunteer for a committee or something, which is how it started. But then that quickly said, yeah, we want you to be on the board. I'm like, okay. And then they said, we met, we want you to be president-elect. I'm like, why? But okay. And I said, does that automatically mean that like I become president? And they said, yeah. So you sit in the wings as president-elect and then you become president, where I am today. And like, and then after that, they said, then you become past president, but you're still very involved as like president emeritus. And I'm like, okay. So that's where we are. But I often say that without PRSA, I don't have a career.
Sorry, Ken, my phone.
Sure. Yeah.
You were saying-
Without PRSA, I don't have a career. I'm probably that kid who didn't get to go to law school. And without the opportunities that PRSA created for me, maybe I'm still in a vault on Wall Street counting bonds. I'm not sure if they still do that, but they do it probably digitally now. But it opened a whole new
you
door
are
for me.
paying it forward.
Yeah. And so that's why I got back involved and why I'm trying to create opportunities for the next generation.
What initiatives do you guys, like, I know you have some awards ceremonies that you guys hold, and tell me some of the initiatives that you guys are working on.
So it's a mix. It's professional development. We just did our first sold out event of the year. And
Congratulations.
it was kind of cool. It was Meet the Media Night, where we had producers from CBS Mornings, The Today Show, and Bloomberg Surveillance. So it's like, had something for everybody, for consumer PR people, for hardcore business PR people, and a panel discussion. And we could have held more, but the location where we did it, security said, we're not going to clear more than 75 people to come into the office after hours. And we hit 75 in like a few days. And that was a pretty cool thing. And then we partnered with the conference board, and they had done a piece of research about burnout and stress in the communications function. And it's at alarming levels, both on the client side, like this most senior person of chief communication officers and CMOs are feeling really stressed out and burnout, but also agency people. And we met with the conference board and said, could you preview that research to our chapter members? And they said, we'd love to do that and even get your insights of, does this feel real to you? So we did that. And that was kind of a depressing night because it was all too real. We started a podcast called In Perspective, with the P and the R capitalized,
Nice.
a little cute with a style. And that's some of what we're talking about here. That's about the career journeys of some of the most senior people in PR. But the purpose of that conversation is to put everything in perspective. And I, in many ways, was inspired by the conference board research of people taking this business too seriously and getting burnt out and stressed. It's PR, not ER. It's a phrase I've heard from time to time. And so I'm proud of that. I'm hosting that. So again, that's wherever you get your podcast, in perspective. And then the gala is coming up really quick. So on September 18th, we have the annual Big Apple Awards, which will be held at Sony Hall this year. And we just sorted all the entries last week. And we have about 30 or so judges, and they've got some work to do this summer because there's a lot of great entries that we're going to need to cull through and give out some awards on the 18th. So
I didn't know if you knew this, Ken, but I am actually one of those judges.
There you go. Prepare yourself.
There you go.
Kind of get really busy.
I did it last year, and I'm very excited to jump back in again this year.
All right. So yeah, I'm not sure if you logged onto the portal yet, but if you haven't, please do. I'm going to do mine this weekend, but there's a lot, and there's a lot of good work.
Back to the reading, right? Lots of reading to do.
Yeah.
If somebody was new to the PR world or existing in the PR world and they wanted to join your fine group, how would they do that? What's the best means do they reach out to you? Do they come to a meeting? What's the best way to do it?
There's no wrong way to do it. I would follow us on LinkedIn, follow us on Instagram, and see what's going on. Anybody should feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn and ask me a question. It's a volunteer organization, so there's always an opportunity to get involved and volunteer, including putting on the Big Apples, which is kind of like the Tony Awards meet the Golden Globes. There's a lot of work that needs to get done. I have a lot of students who come. And last year, I thought I'd get 1 or 2 NYU volunteers, and I got 20. And when I arrived for the awards, they're all dressed in black. And they're doing lighting and rigging and pipe and drape and escorting like Richard Edelman to his table, and like thrilled by the opportunity. So yeah, anybody can get involved. And then there's the national chapter. So go to PRSA.org because you have to join PRSA National first. And then you can join the New York chapter once you've done that. And Ray Day is the president of PRSA National. And he has done just extraordinary things. And he has a platform called Member Mondays. That's a 45-minute conversation. I think it's the second Monday of each month. And he brings in experts to just have a conversation about what communicators should care about. And he's had an economist come on to explain to us what are tariffs and how should PR people be thinking about that and communicating with their clients. He had somebody come on a few weeks ago to talk about the power of language and words and how much word choice matters in your communications. So Ray's doing extraordinary things for the entire community that I'm proud to be a part of. And then we're doing our own fun stuff.
That's awesome.
In New York too.
What advice can we give maybe the student? My 19-year-old son's a sophomore at college. He's majoring in data and analytics. I encourage that because I feel like that is, with the AI and everything else that's being thrust into the world, that someone's going to need to feed the information into there, right? So I think that's the next step for him. But if I want to get involved in public relations and I'm entering a freshman year at Syracuse University, what would you recommend?
So I'll probably get in lots of trouble from my bosses at New York University for saying this out loud. And it's partially true. And I'm not sure, is it more than 50% true? I don't know. But, and maybe this is apropos because it's Father's Day weekend, but the father of public relations is at Bernays. And Bernays was pretty vocal about the fact that he thought you didn't need to study public relations in school to be successful in this business, which is sort of ironic because he also taught the first class in public relations and did so at NYU, but in the business school. So he taught it as a business discipline that he thought executives should understand this new function called PR and how to engage with stakeholders. I don't think he ever envisioned it being part of a communications program or that somebody would get a master's in PR.
Yeah.
Why? So what I would encourage students who are thinking about the business is, one, you can't avoid understanding the future data, the world of digital data analytics. And although, 2 years ago, everyone said prompt engineers were the future, and now that's really not even a job anymore. So things are moving really, really fast. And what you learn in the classroom is not necessarily the conversation that's happening in the boardroom. So what Bernays did is he wrote this for Reader's Digest, if you can believe that, in I want to say late 50s, early 60s. They asked him to author a series of books that they were doing called Your Future In. And when they got to Your Future in Public Relations, they asked if he would write the book, and he did. And that book is now back in print and available. I think the PR Museum made it available again. And in the book, he outlined the criteria of the public relations professional worthy of the name. And ironically, there's nothing in his criteria that says go to a good communication school and get a degree in PR. It's completely the opposite, but all things that I think are really the intangibles of what we do. And he talks about the importance of reading, and reading not just what's interesting to you, but as much as possible. And in it, he cites things that he reads, and he said entertainment magazines, art magazines, popular mechanics, the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal. And that's where I worry about the future of the profession, that everybody's getting their news curated to them. Even if it's on NewYorkTimes.com, it's only serving you up what's popular or the most read right now. What's necessarily the most important to you or your client. For my students, I actually make them read the PDF that the Times and Journal make available for free, but read the paper as it was laid out by the editors. That might not be the most current breaking news, but it's the news that the editors thought was presented in a way based on its importance to the world. So get in the habit of reading that again. Be intellectually curious about everything and out of your comfort zone. Bernays wrote about having a broad world view and really understanding how the rest of the world works. So the opening quote in the first book that they wrote, they quoted Mark Cuban. And the Mark Cuban quote is, if you don't understand the language of business, you'll always be reliant on somebody who does. And I think that's the key thing. It's like, make it your business. If you're going to work for an accounting firm, make it your business to understand how accounting firms work. If you're going to work in healthcare, understand R&D and patents and regulations and what's happening. Like, it's not enough to be able to write a good press release or know who the influencer is or what the digital strategy is. You have to understand, if the CFO stopped you in the hallway, you have to be able to talk about the business in an intelligent way and then talk about how you can contribute to helping the business thrive through what you do. But if you only understand what you do, then you'll be replaceable at some point, probably by AI.
Well said. Well said. Thank you very much. Mr. Ken Kerrigan, thank you so much. One more shameless plug for that book, because when we hang up here, I'm going to run to my computer and get it off Amazon. The name of
I am going, again, I'm such a bad publicist. You would think I have a copy of it. Hold on. That's the Bernays book. Where's my book? So this is the
That's
cover,
great.
Our Future in Public Relations, and it is available on Amazon. It's the publisher, for some reason, thought it was a textbook, and they priced it accordingly, even though it's not. It's a business book. So I tell my own students it's ridiculously expensive, and like somebody hacked it, and I found out on Google recently, like there's a PDF of it that's for free. I think it's not worth more than $19, but I think Amazon wants 50, and I'm like, that's absurd. But buy it if you want.
Absolutely will.
But it's a good book. And when I did it, the book was actually my capstone paper at Syracuse. That took me 18 years to write. And when I presented it, I had to do it as a formal presentation to a bunch of undergrads, and it was PowerPoint. And the title slide was hashtag : Our Future in Public Relations. And I just had the slide up, and I asked the students, speaking of AP Style Guide, does anybody know what that title really means? It's a code. And there was some mumbling, and then the hand went up in the back, and they said, is the title The End? Our Future in Public Relations? And I said, yeah, that's exactly right.
That's cool.
That's The End. And they said, wow, that's so interesting. And then I did my presentation and scared them all. And they said, no, I spent $100,000 on this degree. I'm like, oh, good luck with that. And then I changed it to lose the hashtags because the publisher didn't get it.
That's great.
That's what the book's about. But I am very optimistic about our future.
Ken Kerrigan, thank you so much. This was fantastic. And I look forward to not only judging for the Big Apple Awards, but I will see you there that night.
I will be there.